stars had begun to die. Like ancient wounds across the void, the last lights of the segmentum obscurus flickered, their pale glow swallowed by the tide of darkness spreading from the galactic rim. Nebulae shrank. Planets wept fire. Entire systems vanished into radio silence, their dying screams buried beneath warp storms and the gnawing static of forgotten horrors. But here, on the broken edge of the Imperium Nihilus, something older than despair stirred beneath the ruins of Nostramo's shattered twin. A moon long abandoned, chained in orbit by gravity and memory alone. Stone towers rose from its surface like the vertebrae of a dead god, their spires cracked and eroded by millennia of ash storms and orbital fire. Beneath those towers slept vaults carved not by hands, but by agony. Walls made not of iron, but of promises broken in blood. The Night Lords had returned, but this was no grand legion of vengeance, no thunderous echo of the Great Crusade. This was a scattered remnant, a coterie of murderers, exiles, dreamers and zealots, a ghost of what once was. They were shadows of Kurz's dream, or his nightmare, drawn back to the place where the 8th Legion had died, not in fire, but in prophecy. The void crackled with warning. Far above, lights winked into being, cold, clinical, and aligned with brutal purpose. The Imperium was coming, not for conquest, not for redemption, for extermination. We tell this story slowly, with reverence, because we truly love and care for you. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee, and let's get started. He stood alone in the Hall of Chains. His name had been taken from him, either by oath or madness he no longer knew. Among the Night Lords, he was known only as the Voxless, a war captain of the old breed, forged in the blood mires of Sagualsa and tempered in the silence of Nostramo's grave. He wore his armor like a tomb, deep blue lacquered black with soot, trimmed in brass and scored with scratches. Not from battle, but from clawed fingers, his own. Before him, an altar of cracked obsidian shimmered with flickering vox hollows. Imperial sigils, fleet positions, kill orders. The enemy came with banners of vengeance, Black Templars, Nova Marines, Mortifactors, silent judges from Terra's own shadow prisons. They bore with them the Lex Imperialis writ large, not as law, but as fire. And yet he did not fear them. He feared the voice. It had begun as a whisper, months ago. A dream in static. A hiss in the vox relays no tech priest could isolate. It had a cadence, a rhythm, like a heartbeat choked in glass. It spoke not in language, but in memory. I saw this. That was what it always said. I saw this. And still, I walked into it. The others didn't hear it, or refused to admit they did. They were too far gone, too wrapped in the masks they had made for themselves. Lords of fear, of blood, of torment. But he remembered. He remembered Kurz. He remembered the last sermon of the Night Haunter. Not a command, not a plea, but a surrender to the abyss. And now, in the depths of this forgotten moon, beneath towers carved in mourning, that voice returned. His internal conflict coiled tighter with each hour. Was he hearing Kurz, or was he becoming him? A servo skull hovered at his side, broadcasting an astropathic signal from the outer void. A code. One used only once before, during the Thramas Crusade, when Sevatar had called the Legion home. The Voxless dismissed the signal with a clench of his armoured fist. The skull fell, crumpled like a spider, its light extinguished. From the far end of the hall, footsteps echoed, slow, heavy, purposeful. "Still dreaming in ghosts?" said a voice sharp and amused. It was Captain Erevax, a veteran of the ocular wars, his face a torn canvas of old scars and neural brands. His armor was etched with flayed script, layered in symbols of predation. No wings, no honor markings, only teeth and chain. "They send you now?" the Voxless asked, not turning. "They worry. You've been too quiet. Not even the screams from sub-level 3 carry up anymore. And the men say you mutter in your sleep." The Voxless turned then, his helmet hissing as it disengaged. Pale skin, eyes like old wounds. His face was drawn thin, not from hunger, but from memory. "I listen," he said. "To what?" "Dead gods. The warp." Erevax scoffed. "You think this siege will be won by whispering into the dark? It was never about winning." Erevax frowned, something flickering behind his eyes. "They're coming, in days, not weeks. A full battle group. And they have psychers, sanctioned and soulless. If you're hiding anything down here, I suggest you unleash it soon." The Voxless said nothing, but in his hand, a data slate activated, not by touch, but by recognition. A voice began to play, not his, not Erevax's. It was dry, cracked, familiar. "They are coming, Conrad, and they will kill your sons to erase your prophecy. But some of them will listen in the end. One will write the truth. One will carry the question." Erevax froze. That voice, the Voxless shut it off. A remembrancer from the siege of Istvan. Her words survived in the Legion vaults. She saw Curze. She understood him. "And now you think you do too?" "No," the Voxless said quietly. "I think I'm starting to." Later, alone, he walked the lower vaults, places sealed since the days of Curze's death, tombs for memories, not men. Here, in the silence, the voice returned. Not loud, not violent, just present. "You knew this would end like this. But you came anyway." He stopped before a sealed gate of adamantium and obsidian, its surface carved with the sigils of Nostraman dialects long lost. Buried behind it, something pulsed, faint, warm, perhaps a relic, perhaps a soul. He did not open it, not yet. When he returned to the upper levels, the outermost bastion had already received fire. Bright lances of plasma from orbit. The defenders did not scream. They laughed or sang. Night Lords even now knew how to die. He stood on a viewing platform and watched the first wave of enemy Thunderhawks descend like carrion birds. In his chest, something cracked. A memory, or perhaps a bone. He opened his Vox for the first time in weeks. "To all remaining warbands," he said, voice low but steady. "This will be our last night. Make it scream." Across the moon, the Night Lords howled. The stars flickered. The siege had begun. She had written the words in her own blood. That was the first thing he noticed, as the data slate flickered alive in the crypt-lit gloom of his sanctum. Not ink, not Vox. Blood, dried and cracked in the ridges of old parchment that had been data-bound and preserved by heretics long after her body had crumbled into stardust. She had been a remembrancer, one of the last, a chronicler sent to record the deeds of the Great Crusade, but who had seen too much and survived too long. She'd walked the halls of the Nightfall during the final decades of the Legion's coherence. She had dined with sons of Curze. She had watched them dream and die. Her voice, scratchy with time, poured through the slate's ancient Vox emitter. This is not a history of heroes, nor of villains. This is a chronicle of what lies between, of the silence between heartbeats, where judgment grows too heavy for words. The voxless sat in stillness, the slate resting on his armored knees. Around him, the chamber throbbed with faint blue light, drawn from power cells long past Imperial compliance. He was not alone. 2 serfs kneeled nearby, stripped of tongues and clothed in iron-stitched robes. They flinched at the sound of the woman's voice, but did not run. There was nowhere left to run. I walked aboard the Nightfall once. I thought I would find horror, and I did. But not the kind we tell children to fear, not beasts in the dark, not madness. No, I found conviction. They believed in what they were. That was what terrified me the most. The voxless closed his eyes. He could see it, smell it. The warship drifting in memory, laced with incense and blood. The shrines of bone, the prayers scratched in flayed skin. But more than that, the silence. Not the silence of death, the silence of restraint, of control. The Night Lords had not always been berserkers, not always mad. They had once walked in deliberate terror, measured, surgical, exacting. And now they had become the thing the galaxy always accused them of being. They said Kurz was broken. But what does that mean? He did not weep. He did not shatter. He understood. He saw where this path led and walked it anyway. That is not madness. That is purpose. The war captain rose slowly, the data slate dimming, but not silencing. He carried it with him as he walked the length of the sanctum. Along the walls, relics hung like ghosts, flensed masks from loyalist worlds, stasis tubes containing shattered helms of fallen brothers, a single cracked claw, still crusted with the blood of a dead chaplain. Every piece told a story, but none as honest as hers. His memories came more violently now, not dreams, floods. He remembered Kurz's voice, cold and echoing in the darkened halls of the Nightfall. Not barking orders, not shouting, but asking questions. What are we, if not what they made us? He had been young then, newly ascended to captaincy, eager, furious, lost. Nostramo still burned in his dreams. The weight of judgment hung over them even then. The Emperor watching, silent, never intervening. The Night Haunter had seen it all before it happened. He had told them, and they had ignored him. That was the tragedy of Kurz. Not that he fell, but that he was right. The data slate clicked softly. A new section began. The remembrancer's voice shook now, older, closer to death. There was one, a captain, who showed me mercy. He told me not to confuse fear with cruelty. He said fear was a language, a law, and only those who refused to speak it deserved to suffer. The voxless froze. He remembered her now, her eyes, her voice. She had sat in the observation galleries during interrogations, taken notes, asked no questions. He had let her live. She had seen something in him. Or perhaps he had wanted to believe she had. A part of him, buried beneath pain and prophecy, had believed he might be more than his father's design. That part had died, but his ghost remained. He descended into the deeper sanctum, the ossuary, where the bones of his first company were stored in sacred ash. The walls whispered as he passed, not literally, not yet, but the pressure of the place, the weight of legacy and failure, made it feel as though voices pressed against the edges of his helm. Each skull was engraved with a line of scripture, not from the Lectitio Divinitatus, but from Kurz himself. Fear is not the enemy, it is the chain that binds the beast. Justice is a lie whispered by the powerful. To be righteous in the wicked world is to be wicked by necessity. He reached the sarcophagus of First Talon Galen. a brother who had once stood beside him on Thessaly during the purge of the Cadian exiles. Galen had died laughing as a loyalist dreadnought crushed his spine. His bones still rattled with mirth in death. The voxless kneeled before the tomb, not in worship, in penance. A vox ping, encrypted, internal channel. He accepted. "Captain," came the voice of Erivax, grating and sharp. "We have movement. Outer Watch has sighted the first drop formations. Pattern matches Phobos class insertion. Scouts." "How many?" "Unclear, but they're not hiding. This is a prelude. They want us to see them." The voxless said nothing. "You knew this would happen," Erivax added. "They're not just here to kill us. They're here to erase us. I know. And you're still listening to that scrap of a woman's ghost. She understood us more than we ever did. She was prey," Erivax spat. "That's why she understood." The voxless terminated the channel. The Remembrancer's final entry played. I don't know if they will survive. I don't know if the Night Lords will be remembered as monsters, martyrs, or myths. But I know this. They believed in the fear they wielded. They believed it could bring justice. Perhaps that is the most terrifying thing of all. If you find this, if you hear my voice, remember them not for their claws, not for their terror, but for their silence. Because in that silence, there was truth. The slate went dead, and in the quiet, the voxless felt something stir in the deepest part of his soul, a question he could not answer. Later that night, he walked through the lower cells. The interrogation wards were quiet. The prisoners, few as they were, had long since broken. Some had even begun to pray to Curze, not as a Primarch, but as a god of retribution. The irony would have made Sevatar weep. He stopped before one cell. A woman, young, eyes defiant. "Do you believe in justice?" he asked. "I believe in revenge." He nodded. "So did we." She spat at him. He left her alive. In the central war chamber, he addressed his brothers. "They are coming," he said, "not to defeat us, to destroy the idea of us." Silence. "We are not Curze. We are not Nostromo. We are what remains when the galaxy forgets to be afraid." A murmur of approval. "But we are also something more. We are memory. We are prophecy. We are the last question." He raised the data slate. "She remembered us, and she did not flinch." A pause. "Neither will we." Above, the void shimmered. The first of the enemy dropships breached atmosphere. Fear would follow, but so would memory, so would truth, so would him. He no longer dreamed in sleep. Sleep, such as it came to an Astartes, was a fractured thing, a chemical mimicry of slumber, the body slowing but never still, the mind drifting but never lost. Yet for him, even that illusion had withered. Now, when his eyes closed, it was not rest he found. It was Nostromo, not as it had been in history, but as it had lived in memory. A world of soot and night, a sky forever darkened by industry and sorrow, towering hives that blotted the heavens, their steel ribs exhaling smoke that choked the stars. The people below moved like shadows, gaunt and watchful, hunted even in their own homes. Every corner whispered danger. Every silence begged a scream. He had been born in that darkness, and now, as the siege moon trembled beneath the weight of incoming fire, he was dreaming it again. In the dream, he was not the voxless. He was a child again, nameless, barefoot, skin thin as paper, running through corpse-lit alleys, slipping past the hanging bodies of debtors, ears tuned to the wet hiss of blades in the dark. He could smell the rot of half-buried bone fields, the copper bite of gutter blood. He stopped beneath a cracked statue. An angel with no face, its wings torn off long ago. There, in the glow of flickering lamplight, stood a figure, tall, cloaked in ragged black, eyes like twin knives of blue fire, curs, not in armor, not in his war regalia, but as a man, thin, pale, wearing the shroud of prophecy like a crown of thorns. He didn't speak. He simply raised a hand and pointed to the sky. The child looked up, the sky opened, and fire fell. He woke gasping. The light of the sanctum burned like a forge ember against his retinas. His armor, still half sealed, clung to his flesh like a second skin. Internal pain receptors hummed like caged insects. Across his vision, rune scripts blinked, warnings, reports, kill tallies. But none of it mattered. The dream lingered. Not a dream, he thought. A memory. But whose? He made his way through the lower vaults, slow and unsteady, passing rows of chained helot thralls who dared not meet his gaze. Some whispered prayers to the night haunter. Others wept. In these hours, just before the real war began, fear no longer needed a reason. At the deepest point of the sanctum, he found what he sought. The Chamber of Echoes, a crypt within a crypt, where recordings of the Legion's earliest days had been entombed in vox coils too unstable to access through conventional means. No one came here now. The echoes within were old, corrupted, broken by time or truth. He activated the central archive knowing it might fry half the moon's power grid. He didn't care. The hololith sputtered, then played. Test log, designation KURZPRM 117. Entry, final communique prior to orbital execution of Nostromo. The voice was Kurz's, but not as they remembered him. There was no snarl, no threat, only fatigue, and something deeper, remorse. I have seen what comes, not in prophecy, but in pattern. They will not understand us, not ever. Not until they kneel in the ash of their own cities and remember what justice once looked like. I do not hate them. I pity them. And so I will kill them. Nostromo must burn, not for what it has done, but for what it made me. The recording cracked, broke, reformed. I did not choose this path, but I walked it, and now my sons will walk it too. I pray, gods, if such exist, I pray they find a better reason than I did. Silence. Then, static laughter. Not Kurz's, Sevatar's. You talk too much, old man. The voxless killed the playback. His heart, what remained of it, felt hollow, cracked. He remembered Sevatar. He remembered the laughter that had kept the Legion sane, even as the universe wept blood. And he remembered the night Sevatar vanished, not in glory, not in fire, just gone. Another oath broken, another brother lost. Later, he stood before his inner circle, what few remained. There were 6 of them now. Once, there had been hundreds. Erevax, with his red-plated claws and crucifix helm. Van Talik, the pale artificer whose hands still trembled from the warp scar he bore. Mardek Rael, once a chaplain, now a butcher. The others were lesser names, but their roads had held so far. They stood in the war chamber, where the light from the dying stars filtered through slitted glass. The siege was escalating. The outer stations had gone silent. The enemy was no longer approaching. They were encircling. I dreamed of Nostromo, the voxless said. No one spoke. I saw him, Kurz, not as a Primarch, as a man, alone. Van shifted. We all dream of him, brother. It's the curse in our blood. No, the voxless said. This was not a memory. It was a message. Erevac scowled. Another vision? Another ghost whispering in the dark? We need guns, not riddles. Look around you. We're standing in a crypt pretending to be a fortress. The Imperium isn't coming for our dreams. They're coming for our bones. We cannot face them as we are, the Voxless said. Then say it, Erevac snapped. Say you want to activate the relic. The room went still. The relic. They all knew what he meant. Buried beneath the catacombs, behind lock, gene seal and sigil, was a weapon older than the heresy. A fragment of Kurz's will, encoded into psychic crystal and suspended in null fluid. It had been hidden even from their own during the scouring. To activate it was to bring ruin, not just to their enemies, but to themselves. Open it, said Mardek Rail, voice low. Let them hear his scream one last time. It's suicide, Vaughn muttered. A scream is all it ever was. The Voxless closed his eyes. Kurz's voice echoed in the hollow of his mind. You cannot kill fear. You can only feed it. He turned to Erevax. Can you break the seals? Erevax grinned, though there was no joy in it. I broke better oaths than those. That night, they stood before the vault of the Lost Sun. It was not a vault in the traditional sense. It was a memory turned into matter. A casket made from the broken armor of Kurz's last war plate, interred beneath psychic runes that pulsed with disdain. The Voxless reached forward. The vault recognized him. Pain lanced through his palm. His gene seed screamed. His past writhed. And then it opened. Inside, a single object floated in the null grav field. A shard of black crystal, smooth, perfect, cold. As he approached, it vibrated with a hum that pierced the soul. Voices echoed from within it. Not Kurz's voice. The voices of those he had judged. Millions, billions. The weight of judgment. Take it, said Erevax, eyes wide. The Voxless reached out. The moment his fingers brushed the crystal, his vision split. He saw Nostromo burn. He saw the siege of terror reversed, fire flowing backwards, death undone. He saw himself, thousands of selves, walking different paths. In none of them did he find peace. He dropped the crystal. It did not fall. It watched. They sealed the vault again, not from fear, but from understanding. The relic was not a weapon. It was a mirror, and none of them were ready to look into it again. As he returned to his quarters, the Voxless found a message waiting for him. Not from the Imperials, from within. A single line. He walks again, and he is not alone. His heart clenched. The siege was no longer about survival. It was about prophecy, and prophecy was never merciful. The Voxless stood alone in the crypt, where once Kurz had knelt. Even in silence, the air hummed with the weight of legacy. The stone beneath his boots had been scorched by the Night Haunter's own lightning, burned into the black rock like a scar left on time itself. Here, in this place, the Primarch had once prayed, not to gods, but to fate, to the cold tyranny of cause and consequence, to justice, his kind of justice, which bore no mercy, no redemption, only punishment. And here now, centuries later, his sons gathered not as warriors, but as survivors. Above them, the siege had begun in earnest. The void screamed with the fire of orbital batteries. The outer defenses of their dying moon, a 1,000-year-old carcass held together with will and rust, had begun to fail. The shields buckled under nova lances. Dreadnoughts, long buried in chemical slumber, groaned awake beneath the catacombs. But here, beneath it all, in this shrine of ghosts and prophecy, the Voxless found the message again. This time, carved into flesh, It was branded into the chest of a dead legionary. A Night Lord, one of theirs. They had found him at the outer perimeter, armor shattered, helm removed. He had not died in battle. He had been offered, eyes plucked, tongue torn out, arms broken and set into a pleading pose. Branded words across his chest. He walks again, and he is not alone. Van Talek stared at the body with a 1,000-yard glare. "This isn't Imperial," he said, voice cold. "No sigillite mark, no purity seals, no creed script. This is ours." "You think it's a message?" Erevax growled, his talons twitching with restrained rage. "I think it's a confession," Van muttered. "He was sent to us. Not by the Imperium, by someone who knows our ways." The Voxless nodded. "I know who did this." The others turned. "Say the name," said Mardek Rail. The Voxless looked to the shadows behind the corpse. "Zo Sahal." The room went still. For a moment, it felt as though the air had turned to glass. "That traitorous bastard," Erevax hissed. "We haven't heard his name in centuries." "Exactly," Van said darkly. "Too long. Long enough to build a shadow empire of his own." Rail tilted his head. "You think Sahal survived the heresy, survived the long war, survived us?" "I don't think," the Voxless said. "I know." Sahal, first captain, lord of the Raptors, the lost son of Nostramo. He had vanished after the scouring, declared dead by his own brothers. Some said he fled into the Eye. Others claimed he was devoured by demons. The truth had always been less convenient. Sahal had fled with something more powerful than any relic or demon blade. He had fled with purpose. Where the Night Lords fractured, he endured. Where others descended into madness, he built order. Not for the Imperium, not for chaos, but for himself. The whispers return now like knives in the back of the mind. He walks again, and he is not alone. Outside, the siege moon cracked, plate shields ruptured, hangar bays exploded into the void. The ancient orbital bastions began to fall, not to bombardment, but from within. Sabotage. They came cloaked in shadow, former Night Lords, Raptors, but no longer bearing the sigils of Kurz. Their iconography had been altered, darker still, if such was possible. Wings broken, skulls inverted, their war cries void of sound, their presence felt only as a chill across Vox channels. The enemy had come, and they bore the mark of Sahal. The Voxless descended deeper into the undercrypt, past the gene vaults, past the ossuaries of lost brothers, past even the Hellforges, into the bleeding vault, a chamber forbidden even to the Atramentar. Here, at the edge of sanity, lay the last thing Kurz had left behind. Not a relic, a prisoner. She sat in chains forged from null silver and cursed iron. Her eyes were blind, her mouth sewn shut, and yet she knew him. As he entered, she raised her head. The seer of Varinox, once mortal, now something else. Kurz had captured her at the edge of his own unravelling. Some claimed she had been his oracle. Others said she had been his executioner. The truth was tangled in myth. But what mattered was this. She had seen. Even now, after 10,000 years, her presence bent the air around her like a wound in time. He stood before her, armoured in cracked ceramite, blood on his hands. "I need your sight," he said. She did not speak, but her mind pressed against his like a whisper between heartbeats. "You are too late. He has already breached the veil. The Raptor Prince is not here for conquest. He is here for atonement." "Atonement?" the Voxless spat. "He murders our kin and calls it atonement." Her voice filled his mind again. "He kills not to break the Night Lords. He kills to remake them. In his image. The Voxless trembled. And then she said, he carries the soul of Nostromo within him, and he will burn it again. He emerged from the vault broken and burning. Erevax met him at the gates, helm under one arm, rage in his eyes. The outer perimeter's gone. Sahal's raptors have taken Hangar Delta, killed the 12th Claw, and sent their heads in iron caskets. We're being hunted by our own. Not our own, the Voxless said. His. Rael joined them, his crozier stained red with fresh blood. They're coming through the exhaust veins. Sahal's using old codes. Ones only Kurz should have known. There's no way he got them without... He stopped. They all turned. Without what? Without permission? The realization struck like a bolt of lightning. Kurz had wanted this. A final test. A final judgment. The Voxless looked to the stars and saw only the burning remnants of a promise. They gathered in the war crypt one last time. Only 4 remained. The Voxless, Erevax, Rael, Varn. Once a legion, now a tomb. I won't kneel to him, Erevax said. Not now, not ever. No, said the Voxless. You'll die to him. Varn raised an eyebrow. You sound like you've already accepted it. I have, the Voxless said, but not because I fear him. Then why? Rael asked. Because we've already lost. This was never about victory. This was about punishment. They all fell silent. He looked at each of them in turn. If we die as what we were, not what he would make us. Rael smirked. Then let's make our deaths theological. Erevax chuckled darkly. Varn only nodded. The Voxless opened a private Vox channel, encrypted, ancient. Zo Sahal, he said aloud. You want this war? Come take it. There was silence, then static, then a voice, calm, cold, familiar. I'm not coming to kill you, brother. I'm coming to finish what Kurz began. In the ruins of Hangar Delta, the echoes of war fell silent for the first time in hours. Blood pooled in the cracks of ancient stone, mixing with oil and ichor. Smoke choked the vaulted ceiling, where once Night Lord's dropships had hung like steel vultures above the void. Now they were torn apart, their wings broken, their insides gutted. Some still burned, orange embers hissing where coolant lines had burst and flesh had cooked. Erevax stepped over the corpses of the 12th Claw. He did not look away. Their faces had been left exposed, their helms shattered, jaws broken to mimic laughter, a mockery of their legion's cruelty. They did this as a message, Rael said grimly. He's playing with us. No, said Erevax. He's reminding us who taught him. And in that, there was a bitter truth. Zo Sahal had once learned under these very halls. He had watched his brothers torture and punish with glee. He had seen the slow descent of Kurz's sons into madness, even as he himself walked a different line, not of mercy, but of calculated order. Now, he was not returning as a wayward son. He was returning as the executioner. Elsewhere, in the debris-ridden edge of the siege moon, the Voxless moved through shadow. No longer armored like a warlord, now clad in silence itself. His footsteps made no sound. His breath no longer misted in the cold. He walked through the dust of his brothers like a revenant, his eyes reflecting the flicker of fires as if they were memories. He came to a gate sealed for millennia, a door marked not with runes, but with chains, 7 chains, each one bearing the name of a captain lost to madness. It was here that the Night Lords had buried their greatest shame. The 8th Claw, men who had fallen even by their standards, not to chaos, not to cowardice, but to something worse. They had remembered Kurz too well, He touched the chains. One by one, they dissolved. Inside, the eight claw still lived, naked, bound, eyes clawed out, fed only on blood and memory. And yet, they smiled when the door opened. "We heard his voice," whispered one. "In our dreams." "He returns to bring the fire," rasped another. "We are to be his torches." "You know why I'm here," said the voxless. They laughed, not cruelly, but as lunatics. "To be forgiven?" one mocked. "No." He stepped forward. "I came to unleash you." At Hangar Delta, Sahal walked alone through the aftermath. Not a speck of blood on his armor, his talons still sheathed, his eyes burning beneath a helm shaped like a morning angel. Behind him, his raptors moved with precision, not howling, not chanting, only silent. They took no trophies. They defiled no relics. They merely left messages, every corpse arranged, every hallway painted with the memories of Nostromo. This was not war. This was a liturgy, a funeral sermon for a legion. Rael watched from the upper eyrie of the fortress's edge, staring through a cracked lens at Sahal's advance. "There's no hesitation in his ranks," he muttered. "They're not even checking for traps." "Because they know there's nothing left to trap," said Erevax bitterly. "We've become exactly what Kurz feared." "And what was that?" Rael asked. "Predictable." Rael nodded grimly. "But they forgot one thing," he said. "What's that?" He turned to the darkened horizon, where stormlights now flickered like a coming plague. "They forgot who we were before the madness." The voxless stood before the remnants of the eighth claw. "Do not speak," he said. "Only listen." He told them of the siege, of Sahal's return, of the message carved into flesh, of the bleeding vault, of the prophecy that Nostromo's soul would burn again. And then he said, "You were cursed for remembering too much. Now I curse you again, to act." Their faces twisted with joy. "What would you have us do, my lord?" He turned his head, and for a moment, just a flicker, the shadow of Kurz passed over his eyes. "Kill your brothers." The war turned. It was not a battle, not a siege. It was a purge. The raptors loyal to Sahal moved deeper into the moon's core. But they were not prepared for what met them. Not resistance, not strategy, but madness. The eighth claw fell upon them like starving dogs, screaming visions of Kurz, laughing in tongues lost to Nostromo's ghettos. Wearing the faces of the dead as masks, they slaughtered the intruders not for war, but for art. The corridors became mausoleums. Every raptor flayed, every sigil torn, every brother remade into a symbol of sin. Sahal felt it, even as he reached the throne vaults. He looked to his lieutenants. "They've unleashed the ghosts," he said quietly. "They're cornered," one said. "They're desperate." Sahal stared at the shrine ahead, where the corpse of Kurz still lay entombed in shadow glass. "No," he said. "They're faithful." In the war crypt, Rael lit the last incense stick he had carried since the scouring. A ritual of mourning, a ritual for the end. Erevax cleaned his blade, a slow, meditative action, though the edge was long dull from overuse, and the voxless came to them at last. "I've released the eighth," he said. Rael laughed, bitter and weary. "Then we've truly gone mad." "No," the voxless replied, "only honest." Erevax stood. "What's your plan, old ghost?" The voxless looked upward, to the cracked dome above, where stars bled through like forgotten gods. "I will kill Sahal myself." "And what of us?" Rael asked. "You'll hold the gate." "That's not a plan," Erevax growled. "It's a legacy." The three met at the final threshold. the last sealed gate before the vault of Kurz. On one side Rael, Erevax and the Voxless. On the other, Zo Sahal. He removed his helm, revealing a face not aged, not broken, but immortal. The face of a Primarch's son, who had never stopped believing. In the dark, in fear, in judgment. He looked at them, not with hatred, but with sorrow. "You should have joined me," he said softly. Rael grinned through bloody teeth. "We still might." Erevax spat. Sahal turned to the Voxless. "You knew this would end here." "I knew it had to." They stepped forward. No more words, only war. And as they clashed, brother against brother, son against son, the siege moon itself began to crack, not from bombardment, but from the weight of history, from the pressure of truths long buried. And in the catacombs below, the eighth claw carved their gospel in blood. We remember, we endure, we punish. The Night Lords would fall, but not in silence, in symphony. There are no thrones left in the void, only memories of judgment. At the heart of the siege moon, beneath miles of iron bone and echoing crypts, lay the vault where the night haunter once slept in death. Entombed in midnight crystal, unmoving, unrotting, his corpse untouched by time, his visage unaged, as if he simply waited. They had called it the Sanctuary of Thorns. But no sanctuary remained now. Its walls were split, its guardians shattered. The gates that once shimmered with shadow glass stood torn asunder. Sahal stepped into the vault, alone. No warriors flanked him. No heralds sang his name. This was not a place of victory. This was hallowed ground. And he came not as a conqueror, but as a son. The body of Conrad Kurz still lay where it had for 10,000 years, unmoving, eyes closed, as if dreaming, as if the screams of Nostramo still echoed through his mind. Sahal knelt before the crystal sarcophagus, and for a moment the mask of war cracked. "I remember," he whispered. "I remember your hands. Hands that held him aloft in the training cages of Tsagwalsa. Hands that struck him when his blade faltered. Hands that once reached toward terror not to grasp glory, but to curse it. I remember your voice and your silence." He placed his talons upon the crystal. "I remember the fear." And as he spoke, the tears came, silent and unseen beneath his helm. Tears not for grief, but for the father he could never become. Outside the vault, the battle raged. The Voxless fought with the fury of 10 lifetimes. He moved not as a man, but as a curse incarnate. All silence, all shadow, a wraith of vengeance reborn. His blade found throats before they could scream. His fist shattered ceramite as if it were ash. And yet, he bled. Even legends bleed. Rael held the gate with burning lungs and a cracked helm, laughing through shattered ribs. Erevax stood atop a mound of the fallen, chanting prayers in Nostraman. Not to gods, but to ghosts. "We are the night. We are the blade. We are the sin." Again and again, as if each death bought them a heartbeat longer. In the vault, Sahal rose. "I have seen our brothers rot," he said to the corpse. "I have watched the eighth become carrion eaters, blood scribes, flayers without scripture. I have watched us forget." He turned, casting his gaze across the relics that lined the vault. Kurz's broken gauntlets, his cracked mask, the half-sigil of the Night Lords cut from his final warplate. A shrine not of worship, but of remorse. "They feared you because you showed them the truth," he said, "and I feared you because I understood it." He removed his helm, face pale, eyes dark, haunted. "But now I will finish your work." At the outer gate, the raptors began to fall back, not in retreat, but in realization. Sahal had not come to conquer. He had come to succeed, to ascend, and the gate, broken and scarred, now stood between two visions of the Legion, one that remembered Kurz as a father, and one that remembered him as a prophecy. Rael saw it first. The vault isn't a tomb. Erevax nodded, barely breathing. It's a womb. The Voxless, blood-soaked and barely upright, turned his eyes to the final corridor. I have to go to him. Rael grabbed his arm. You'll die. I should have died 10,000 years ago. Inside the vault, Sahal knelt once more. This time, not to mourn, but to offer. He drew his blade and laid it at Kurz's feet. Then the trinkets, bones from the wars of Tsagualsa, the eye of a murdered inquisitor, the broken claw of a demon prince of Slanesh. Tokens, confessions. Father, he said, voice hoarse, this is my last vision. I will remake the Eighth, not as butchers, not as madmen, but as judges. He rose and walked to the crystal. I ask nothing in return, only that you watch. And with that, he drew the ritual dagger from his belt and cut his own throat. The blood hit the crystal, and something stirred. Not the body, not the corpse, but the shadows. They thickened, lengthened, not with sound but with weight. A pressure filled the vault, a storm without wind, the weight of a scream never uttered, a terror older than language, a voice that never spoke, yet shattered resolve. The shadows bent over Sahal's dying form. They did not consume him. They welcomed him. The Voxless reached the vault too late. The gates were already splitting apart. Darkness bled from the seams. He stepped inside and saw not the boy he once knew, but the thing that stood in his place. Sahal rose, his neck whole, his eyes black, his armor now warped by memory itself. No demonic glow, no chaos taint, only night. Do you see now? He asked softly. The Voxless stared unmoving. You killed the Legion, Sahal continued. You let it rot in shame. I bring it rebirth. No, the Voxless replied. You bring it desecration. They clashed in silence. No war cries, no glory, only fury. Sahal moved with inhuman precision. Every strike a reflection of Kurz's old forms. Every motion a sermon in murder. The Voxless countered, not as a warrior, but as a memory. Every wound he took was a confession. Every strike he landed, a prayer. They fought across the relics of the vault, shattering altars, spilling ancient dust. Sahal's blade sang with vengeance. The Voxless fought with broken fists and bleeding hands. And at the end, Sahal drove his talon through the Voxless's chest and whispered, I am what he always meant us to become. The Voxless smiled through blood. No, you're what he feared. And then he detonated the charges he had hidden in his armor. The vault exploded, not outward, but inward, collapsing into itself. Stone and shadow and steel fell like a dying star. A sarcophagus cracked, a mask split, a sun screamed, and the siege moon wept. Amei Suri. On the surface, Rael and Erevax saw the tremor ripple through the ground. The sky turned black, the stars blinked, and all across the moon the fighting stopped. Raptors halted mid-slaughter. The eighth claw began to sing. Because they felt it, the vault was gone. The prophecy ended. But some say something crawled from the ashes, not man, not God. A figure clad in the shards of Kurz's sarcophagus, wings of broken ceramite, eyes burning with mourning. They say he walked the corridors alone, judging, not killing, not preaching, only watching. And some say he still walks the edges of dead stars, a silent son of the night, the last lord. In the wake of the vault's collapse, there was no victory. No banners were raised, no cries of triumph, only silence. A silence so deep it pressed into the bones of every Night Lord who still breathed. The siege moon no longer groaned with the weight of battle. Its halls were tomb still, the scent of ash and ancient blood drifting like a funeral hymn. No more war horns, no more shrieks, just the echo of something unfinished. Rael staggered to the edge of the ruin, eyes dim behind a fractured visor. He did not speak. He could not. The vault was gone, and with it, the last sons of the old legion. In the dark above the moon, the stars flickered, but one light remained constant, a singular eye, red, unblinking, ever watching. It was not a star, it was a ship, the eclipsed eye, a relic from the Great Crusade, its hull blackened by 10,000 years of betrayal and exile. Once, it had served as a flagship in the fleet of Sevatar, first captain of the Night Lords. Now, it drifted like a silent witness, waiting for a signal that never came. Its crew, what remained, had long since ceased to be mortal. They were shadows encased in rusted warplate, men who had long since abandoned sleep, memory and fear. At their center sat a figure unmoved for centuries, the seer of the Iron Wake. He was once a librarian before the ruin storm, before Prospero fell. Now he was little more than a conduit. His eyes had been sealed shut by ritual scars, his voice taken in an oath of silence sworn beneath the bones of Kurz himself. He did not see as men did. He remembered forward, and on this day his visions burned. He saw the vaults collapse. He saw the talon break through the Voxless's chest. He saw the final detonation, and he saw a winged shadow crawling from ruin, a figure with broken eyes, with judgment in his bones. The seer shuddered. The Legion's last prophecy had ended, but something worse had begun. He reached out across the bridge of the eclipsed eye, brushing his hand against the ship's ancient cogitator. A phrase burned into the screen in crackling text, a remnant of forgotten code. He walks, he judges, he does not forgive. Across the ship, systems reactivated, engines flared, sensors turned inward. The ship did not flee, it waited, because the sun that rose from the vault was not Sahal, not anymore. Back on the moon, Erevax moved among the dead like a monk in a crypt. He collected helms, not for trophies, but for remembrance. Each helm bore a sigil. Each sigil told a name. He stacked them in circles, not for display, but for ritual. The Voxless had taught him that names matter, that memory is a weapon more powerful than any bolter. Rael joined him silently, dragging what was left of a fallen raptor. They did not speak for hours. Only when the circle was complete did Erevax break the silence. Did we end it? Rael stared into the ash. No, we began it. Elsewhere in the ruins, others emerged. Not many, but enough. Raptors with clipped wings, claws without captains, shadows without purpose. They gathered around the broken vault, silent and lost, until they saw him, the figure walking through fire. He had no helm. His eyes burned with a muted light. Not demonic, not blessed, but knowing. The shadows bent around him, not in worship, but in recognition. He did not speak, but each warrior dropped to one knee as he passed, because deep down they all knew. This was not Sahal reborn. This was Kurz's echo. In the void, the eclipsed eye received one final transmission, encrypted, fragmented, but unmistakable. A voice, barely more than a whisper. I see you. The seer collapsed in convulsions. A dozen astropaths bled from the eyes. The ship shuddered, not from damage, but from dread, because no one had spoken those words in 10,000 years, not since the night Nostromo died. The new warlord walked alone to the highest spire of the moon. There he stared into the stars. His armor was patchwork, his skin scarred, but he held himself with the bearing of a prince who had never needed a throne. "Erevax," he said softly. The priest approached. "You have something for me?" Erevax knelt and opened a bundle of relics. The talons of the Voxless, the chain blade of Rael's old captain, a shard of Curz's broken claw, and a name scribed in blood and oil, Vigilant. The new warlord stared at it and nodded. "That is what I'll be." They did not rebuild the vault. They buried it, stone by stone, not to hide what was within, but to let it rest. The warlord, now called Vigilant, spoke little in those days. But when he did, his voice held iron. "We do not fight for gods," he told the remaining Night Lords. "We do not fight for vengeance. We fight so that memory hurts." The eclipsed eye descended once more, not as conqueror, but as witness. The seer was brought before Vigilant. He knelt with shaking limbs, tears streaming down his sealed eyes. I saw what you became." Vigilant stepped forward. "Then tell me," he said, "did I become worse than him?" The seer trembled. "No, you became what he feared." Vigilant turned away. "Then he was right, and I will finish what he began." And so it was that the siege moon became something new, no longer a temple, no longer a crypt, but a mirror, to all that the Night Lords were, and all they had failed to be. And from it, Vigilant sent out his judgments, not as a conqueror, but as a shadow of truth, a living scar, a child of nightmares, not to bring fear, but to remind the galaxy that justice can wear wings of broken steel, and it never sleeps. In the depths of the void, ships drifted like tombstones. Once, they had been warships of the Imperial Navy, proud and pure in their oath to the throne. Now, they floated gutted and defiled, their hulls torn open like offerings to the dark. No logs remained, no cries of distress, no signs of survivors, only bloodless silence. And in each shattered bridge, carved with surgical precision across metal and bone, was the same sigil burned into the wall in scorched ceramite, a broken wing, a single eye, a crown of barbed wire, the mark of the Vigilant. He didn't strike for glory. He didn't conquer worlds. He left behind no banners, no sermons, no symbols of devotion, only judgment. Entire ships that trafficked in refugees, gone. Planetary governors with the taste of cruelty, found butchered in their thrones, their attendants untouched. Slave moons that had once hidden behind bureaucratic fog, lit with cleansing fire. The Imperium took notice, but not fast enough, because Vigilant moved not as a warlord, but as a ghost. He did not occupy, he unveiled. Among the shadows of the Night Lords, change brewed like stormlight beneath a glass sky. The raptors no longer laughed as they once had. They knelt in silence before their prey, taking no trophies. Helms were painted not with lightning bolts, but with the black of mourning. Fear was no longer a weapon. It was a burden. And among them, Erevax preached without a voice. He had plucked out his tongue the day Vigilant rose. He spoke now through gesture, scripture, and ritual, writing new gospels with ink made of ash and void oil. He called it the Book of Ends. In that book, no gods were named, no primarchs praised, only sins recorded, not to seek forgiveness, but to ensure they were never forgotten. It was not heresy, it was memory weaponized, and each warrior who survived the judgment carried a page of the Book of Ends into battle, pressed behind their breastplate like a funerary scar. Rael walked beside Vigilant in silence now, not as a second, not as a servant, but as a reminder. He had once questioned Sahal, had once defied, had once fled. Now he followed the echo of that same man, reshaped by fire and grief, walking not in chains but by choice, and in that choice was his penance. "I remember when we were feared," Rael once whispered. "To be feared is nothing," Vigilant replied. "To be understood is what they will never forgive." Beyond the Eye of Terror, the rumours began to spread like rot in cathedral stone. The Imperium whispered of a ghost legion, of a war band that killed quietly, who did not preach to the dark gods, who offered no demonic pact, who took no planets, made no demands. They called them heretics, but they did not know them. Only one name passed through the inquisitorial halls like a prayer made of dread: the Vigil. And though they debated purging them, none could locate their home, because the siege moon had vanished, not destroyed, but cloaked. It existed between scars in real space, within the umbral edge of the maelstrom, where memory folds in on itself, and there it waited, not as a fortress, but as a mirror. In time, others came, not just Night Lords, renegades, betrayers, disillusioned Astartes. They came not for redemption, but to confess. They knelt before Vigilant not as penitents, but as men who had seen too much, who could no longer pretend that loyalty meant justice. Some were turned away, some were judged and executed, but some stayed, and they changed. They painted their armour in mourning black, removed the sigils of their legions, and took no name but witness. They became the silent choir, warriors who followed Vigilant into forgotten wars, spoke only in riddles, and wept before they killed. Erevax wrote their names into the book, not in honour, but in warning, because every soul who joined the Vigil had once believed in something, and had it broken. Vigilant read each name before battle, not to inspire, but to bleed, because their pain was not a flame to warm him. It was the iron crown he chose to wear. One night, as the siege moon drifted close to a dying star, Rael approached Vigilant atop the ancient battlement. "What are we now?" he asked. Vigilant did not look at him. "We are the punishment they forgot they deserved. And when they remember..." Vigilant finally turned. "Then we become the mirror." Rael's voice cracked. "Do you still dream?" Vigilant did not answer. But in the stars above, the reflection of a broken wing shimmered briefly, and was gone. They did not sing. They did not pray. They did not even scream in the midst of battle. The silent choir fought in absolute stillness, without chant, without vox command, without war cry. Astartes forged in grief, wielding death with reverent quiet. Each one had severed his own tongue, not for punishment, not for symbolism, but because in their silence they could hear the dying better. They bore no heraldry, no banners, no nameplates, only a single black ribbon tied to the pommel of their weapons, fluttering like the last breath of something holy. Wherever they marched, death followed as a whisper. There were no orbital bombardments, no thunderous drops, no hailing fire from the heavens. The choir arrived in silence and left nothing but memory, and they were growing, not by recruitment, but by consequence. those who witnessed their judgment, those with broken hearts and clarity enough to feel shame, sometimes returned, alone, unarmed, bleeding, to the edge of the siege moon, and if Vigilant judged their pain true, they were permitted to kneel in silence among the choir, not as soldiers, but as witnesses. Among the choir was one warrior who had not yet fallen to grief, but to clarity, a former White Scar named Jugatai Malik, whose laughter had once been legend. He had turned against his Khan, not in rage, but in understanding. "For every race we won, brother," Malik had whispered, "we left the slowest to die behind us." Now he ran only in the dark, beside those who did not smile. In battle, he wielded twin blades named Mercy and Regret. Erevax watched them all, the choir, the vigil, the old, the newly broken. He added their pain to the Book of Ends, writing each name into the parchment with blood-black ink. Never with praise, never with triumph, only as a tally, a warning to whatever future might dare to rise from the ruin of this age. He did not believe in prophecy, but he believed in lessons, and lessons must be recorded, not to teach the righteous, but to haunt them. One night, aboard the highest tower of the siege moon, the vigil assembled, not to war, but to remember. Every warrior who stood among them carried a shard of something they had destroyed: a blade, a bone, a child's pendant, a prayer book, a skull. They placed these tokens before a hollow monument, a throne never claimed, a seat of leadership left empty by design. Because Vigilant refused to sit, he did not reign, he witnessed. Rael approached the throne. He held no relic, only his memory. "I remember Conrad Kurza," he whispered. Silence fell like a curtain. "I remember a man who could see the end before it began. A man who knew that truth without mercy was a blade that could only cut once." He looked up at the choir. At the end, Kurz laughed, but it wasn't madness. Rael's voice trembled. It was acceptance. Vigilant stepped forward. He placed a single black feather at the foot of the throne. It was not from any bird. It had been shaped from the shredded wings of his old jump pack, burned black and twisted during his last battle under the 8th Legion's banner. He knelt, and the entire vigil followed suit. Across the hollow halls of the siege moon, for the first time in centuries, a sound rang. Not war horn, not gunfire, but the echo of 1,000 warriors breathing in unison, as if mourning a galaxy too broken to heal. Outside, in the void beyond time, a signal pulsed across the stars. It was not a call to arms. It was not a warning. It was a confession. Coordinates encoded in sorrow, broadcast on a frequency known only to those who had once been sons of thunder, now turned sons of dust. And far away, hidden in the bleeding corners of the Imperium, something ancient stirred. Not chaos, not man, but memory. In the swamps of Baradash, a forgotten librarian of the Blood Angels paused in his trance and wept. In the ice mines of Grelzar, a lone tech priest painted the broken sigil of the vigil across his forge's altar. And in the ruins of Sagwalsa, where the bones of the night haunter still slept beneath stone, the wind whispered a name that had not been spoken aloud in 10,000 years. Sahal. But Vigilant was not waiting for worship. He was preparing for war, not to win, but to balance the scale. He knew what was coming, not just the Imperium, not just the ruinous powers, but something else, something ancient, patient, hungry. And when it came, it would not ask who you served, only what you remembered. There are wars that change the course of history, There are wars that burn the skies and crack the crust of worlds. And then there are wars that go unrecorded, unremembered, not because they were small, but because those who survived refused to speak of them. The siege of Desolation Gate was such a war. It had no victors, only witnesses. The Desolation Gate was not a place. It was a lie, a construct buried beneath the crust of a long-dead moon orbiting the corpse of a sunless system, built in the forgotten age of old night, a vault, a key, a trap. The Vigil found it first, though found is a generous word. It called to them, whispered to their librarian remnants in dreams too clear to be mere warp noise. Dreams of angels falling in slow motion, of wings made of light shattering on thrones made of teeth. They followed the signal not out of curiosity, but guilt and memory. The gate was sealed with code sigils that screamed when broken, not a scream of vox or data, but of souls, as if each lock they bypassed tore another page from the Emperor's own book, cast into a pyre. Behind those seals were sarcophagi, dozens, each one older than the Imperium. They were not coffins for the dead, they were prisons for the immortal. The first to awaken was an angel encased, wings of gold, face of marble, eyes of ruin. His armour bore no chapter, no legion, no heraldry. Only a single phrase etched across his breastplate in sigils long erased from imperial record. I held the flame when all others let it die. He rose, not as a hero, not as a saviour, but as a question. Vigilant did not draw his blade, not yet. He approached, steps deliberate, body still. I know what you are, he said, or what they made you. The angel did not speak. He only looked past Vigilant, past the vigil, into the void of stars overhead, and he wept. Tears of mercury, tears that hissed where they fell, burning, divots into the stone. There was no war then, not in the way the galaxy expected. No sides, no banners, only grief turned into motion. The angel walked through the vigil's ranks, pausing before each brother as if weighing their soul. When he reached Rael, he knelt and whispered, I remember you. Rael did not answer. His knees buckled beneath him, and he sobbed. Later, they uncovered more vaults, more angels. Not all wept. Some screamed. Some laughed in tones that shattered voxcasters. Some tried to fly, flinging themselves into the sky, only to fall broken, again and again. These were the forgotten choir, the first Thunder Warriors remade, not by genecraft, but by binding, artificial demigods, meant to rule, sealed away by the Emperor himself, not for failing, but for remembering what he asked of them. The Vigil did not kill them. They could not. Even Vigilant, blade of finality, did not raise his hand. Instead, they did the unthinkable. They sheltered them, built sanctuaries on that lightless moon, temples not of worship, but of stillness. The angels did not want vengeance. They did not want war. They only wanted one thing, to not be forgotten again. But the galaxy does not permit peace for the broken, and so came the hunt. The Inquisition noticed the silence. The black ships diverted course. The Eversaw temples awoke, and for the first time in millennia, the angels prayed, not to the Emperor, not to the gods, but to the void, to be taken back before they were turned into weapons once more. Vigilant refused. You were not made for war, he told them, but you were forged in fire. That means something. The angels, silent, listened, and in the final hour, they stood, their wings unfolded, no longer gold, but blackened, feathers of iron and sorrow, and they took to the sky not as conquerors, but as shields. The Inquisition's vanguard arrived as a storm. Exterminatus protocols authorized. The moon was targeted, not for capture, but for erasure. And in that hour, the forgotten choir sang, not with voices, but with light. Each one detonated the stasis cores still embedded in their armor, creating a lattice of warp disruption fields that shattered the incoming bombardment mid-fall. They burned, not because they were forced, but because they chose to. Vigilant stood in the aftermath, black rain hissing around him, ash coating his pauldrons like funeral snow. He looked to the sky, where no angels remained, only falling dust, and whispered, "I remember." Behind him, Rael placed a new entry in the Book of Ends. No names, no epitaphs, just a single line. The angels remembered. But the death of the forgotten choir had a cost. The Inquisition now knew. They would not forget. They would not stop. And the siege moon, once a bastion of reflection, would become a target, not just for purging, but for consumption. Because within the Book of Ends were secrets not meant for the still living. And in the heart of Vigilant's blade was a sliver of something older than the warp itself. Something that now began to whisper back. There are sounds the galaxy has not heard in 10,000 years. The cracking of Nostraman's sky glass beneath boot. The ragged breath of a Night Lord speaking his true name. And the voice of Kurz himself, whispering through static across the ghost channels only dead planets still remember. Tonight, those sounds returned. The vigil hadn't meant to come to Nostramo. They never do. The planet is dead, shattered, cored by orbital bombardment until only its cracked shell remains, spinning in silence. But something called to them. Rael heard it first. A vox burst buried in the spine of a ruined astropathic relay, repeating every 11 hours in a tongue older than Gothic. A child's voice, software broken. Tell him he didn't have to fall alone. They descended into the core fractures of Nostromo through tunnels not made by any machine. Veins of obsidian wept violet blood. Statues of armless saints lined the walls, each one blindfolded, mouths sewn shut. It was not just death that lingered here. It was memory and pain and penance. Vigilant said nothing, but Rael watched him closely. There was a tremble in the way his gauntlet brushed the walls. Not fear, but recognition. He'd been here before, not in body, but in dream. At the fracture's end, they found the Throne of Echoes, a black iron seat, welded into the stone by centuries of ritual sacrifice. Upon it sat a single figure, a Night Lord, alive, unmoving, clad in armor so old, even the stars had forgotten its shape. No helmet, eyes shut, skin pale as frost, lips whispering. And from his chest extended a dozen cables, plugged into the rock, the stone, the planet itself. He was the source of the Vox, the last voice of Nostramo, a living choir, sustained by pain, by will, by regret. He spoke not to the vigil, but to himself, again and again. I told him. We didn't have to fall. Rael approached slowly, kneeling. Who are you speaking to? The Night Lord did not answer, but the walls did. They whispered. The Father. Rael turned to Vigilant, but the Lord of the Vigil was already removing his helm. Beneath it, he looked not like a warrior, but a son. Tired, grieved, unhealed. He whispered the name not written in any imperial record. Sevek. The Night Lord opened his eyes and wept black tears. Once long ago, before he was vigilant, before the scars, before the silence, he had been a brother to the 8th Legion, a failed one, too kind, too quiet. He had left before the heresy, or had been let go. He did not remember which, but Sevek did. He remembered everything. What followed was not battle, not reunion, but confession. Rael recorded it all in the Book of Ends, a chapter of sin, a chapter of forgiveness. Sevek had remained behind when Nostramo fell, not as a punishment, but as a witness, to record what Kurz could not, to keep a memory of the Legion's soul before it shattered fully. For 10,000 years, he had spoken into the void, hoping one day a son would return, and now one had. I failed him, Sevek said, voice rasping like dying coals. Vigilant shook his head. Number, he failed you. You gave him a choice. And he chose fear. Vigilant nodded. So we must choose differently. Sevek smiled through blood. You were always the dreamer, and you were always the truth. They embraced, for the first and last time. Then Sevek reached behind the throne and pulled free a blade. Not a chainsword, not a relic, but a memory. It was the knife of Kurz, the one he used before he was a Primarch, before he was Night Haunter, a simple blade, forged in a slave's fire, etched with runes of vengeance. He left this for the one who returned. He said, "You would." Vigilant took it with reverence, and for a moment the world paused. Rael saw it then, the truth behind the truth. Vigilant had not abandoned the Night Lords. He had carried them, in his silence, in his refusal to speak the Legion's name, in the way he never raised his voice. He had been mourning them this entire time. Then Sevek smiled and detonated. His life thread, his voice, his connection to the planet, all funneled into a single psychic scream that echoed across the void. A final message, not to the Vigil, but to the sons who remain scattered in the shadows. It is not too late to come home. The Vigil left the planet in silence, but Vigilant carried the blade with him. He did not speak for many hours, until finally he looked to Rael and said, "We are not who they said we were. We are what we choose to remember." In that moment, the Book of Ends did not update itself. It breathed, pages turned, and a new entry appeared. Kurz did not die in silence. His sons heard him, and one of them listened. There are legions the Imperium mourns, and there are legions it tries to forget. The Night Lords are neither. They are a scar, a jagged, healing wrong scar upon the neck of a broken empire, too deep to fade, too shameful to speak aloud, but scars remember, and in the silent vaults beneath the Vigil's bastion, remembrance stirred. After Nostramo, Vigilant did not return to war. He returned to ritual, the kind of ritual no priest dared speak of, not the worship of gods, but the reckoning of sins. Rael watched as Vigilant descended into the ossuary, where broken armor was kept, untouched since the days of the Great Scouring. Helmets fused shut by plasma, gauntlets still curled into fists, each one labelled only by number, never name. This was where the forgotten were kept, the unspoken dead, and Vigilant knew them all. They were not monsters, he said, as he passed the sealed reliquaries. They were made to be, then abandoned for becoming what they were forged to become. Rael said nothing. This was not a moment for interruption, only witnessing. came to one vault marked 13B. It was colder than the others. Frost bloomed along the seal, and something inside it breathed. A relic, then, or a prisoner. Rael wasn't sure which. When the vault opened, a stasis field collapsed, and the room filled with the sound of whispers, dozens, hundreds, layered, a chorus of judgment unceasing. Vigilant stepped inside and bowed. From the darkness emerged a figure, massive, cloaked in chains. His armor was Night Lord ceramite, but stripped of all heraldry. His helm bore no eyes, only scars, and where the Aquila had once been, there was only a knife, driven through the heartplate. "Do you remember me?" Vigilant asked. The figure said nothing, but the chains shifted, not in rage, in recognition. "I left before the madness," Vigilant continued. "But you didn't. You endured. You saw what we became." Still silence, but the whispers grew louder. Rael clutched his ears. They were names. Names of cities flayed, families cold, worlds burned. This thing was a vessel of every sin the Legion had never spoken of. A confessor of the Night Lords. "I don't ask forgiveness," Vigilant said. "I ask truth." The figure raised its head, spoke at last. Its voice was 1,000 voices. "Then kneel." Vigilant did, and the confessor placed a single clawed hand upon his helm. Memories surged. The fall of Tsagualsa, the screams of the silent massacres, Kurz's final hours on Sabo's world, begging for justice, knowing none would come, and within it all, the faces of the fallen sons. Rael saw it too, not through vision, but through the vibration of the chamber. A psychic bleed, too old to be called warp sorcery, too sacred to be heresy. This was not corruption. This was reckoning. When Vigilant rose, the blade of Kurz was gone. In its place, a new mark glowed upon his gauntlet, the sigil of the oath unspoken, a pact made between the broken sons of a broken Primarch. No legion, no chapter, only memory, only vow. Back above, the sky had turned to storm. Rael followed Vigilant to the Hall of Echoes. Here, the names of those who had died for the vigil were carved in whisper steel, so thin the air itself could slice it. Vigilant took no tools. He carved with his finger. A single name. Sevek. No rank, no glory. Just the name of a brother who had waited too long in the dark. "Why now?" Rael finally asked. "Why remember what the Imperium has spent 10,000 years trying to bury?" Vigilant looked to him tired, older than ever, but not broken, only resolved. "Because memory is a kind of mercy," he said, "and the Night Lords were never given mercy, only fear." He turned to leave. Rael followed, but the wind carried a final echo, a voice older than the war, older than fear, Kurz's voice, soft where sorrowful. "I did not fall. I was pushed." And across the stars, in places where shadows gather and old suns wait for the next nightfall, something stirred. Not vengeance, not redemption, only the whisper of a name once feared, now mourned. Night Lords. And the galaxy, for a moment, did not flinch. It remembered. It is said there are ruins where no words are spoken, not by birds nor men, nor the wind itself, where silence is not absence but wait, a silence that remembers. And upon one such ruin, the ash-stained world of Cerinthus Minor, Vigilant walked again. Once a forge moon under the dominion of the Adeptus Mechanicus, Cerinthus had been burned not by war, but by fear. its manufactorums sealed from within, its magi executed by their own Skitarii, a whole world self-martyred, rather than risk what the Night Lords had once left buried in its vaults. No records remained, only ashes. But Vigilant remembered. Rael had read the surviving data fragments, mentions of Project Epitaph, of gene thought resonance and recorded suffering, a weapon not of steel, but of memory, pain encoded, multiplied, and fed into the minds of men until they became something less than human, and more like Night Lords. In the dust-choked chambers of Vault Sigma 9, the echoes still screamed. Vigilant moved slowly, not out of fear, but reverence. He placed his gauntlet upon the central data nexus. Ancient cables snaked around him like arteries, and something woke. Not a machine, not a demon, a voice, faint, burned, but familiar. "You are late, brother." Rael stepped back. The voice did not echo in the chamber. It echoed in his mind. "Sevek," Vigilant said softly. Rael felt the name like a weight behind his eyes. He saw flashes, a battlefield lit by orbital fire, a boy with blood on his teeth laughing, a cell with no walls, only screams. "Are you still you?" Vigilant asked. "Number. I am the last breath of Sevek, the part that didn't break, the part that remembers what it means to be Legion." The voice wept, though no tears came, only static, only sorrow. "They made me into a song, brother, a dirge encoded in Vox runes, a weapon of grief. And yet I sang it willingly. I chose this." Rael could not bear it. "What is he?" he whispered. Vigilant turned. "He is the answer to a question the Imperium dared not ask. What if we did not fall? What if we were sacrificed?" The machine stirred, and suddenly Rael could hear it too. The memories, children orphaned by inquisitorial decrees, cities left to rot because they had once traded with traitors, systems abandoned not for heresy, but for inconvenience. Sevek was not a spirit. He was the ledger of sins the Imperium refused to carry, a mirror to the Night Lord's truth, that they were not monsters alone, but reflections. "Why bring me here?" Rael asked. "To show me this pain?" "No," Vigilant said, "to give it to you." And before Rael could speak, Vigilant stepped back, and the cables wrapped around him. The machine flared, and Rael screamed. Not from pain, but from understanding. He saw terror before the heresy. He saw Kurz on Nostramo, begging the Emperor to look. He saw himself, as a child, as a soldier, as a ghost already buried. Then it ended. Rael collapsed. He could still feel Sevek, a heartbeat not his own, a voice at the edge of sleep. "You are now witness," Vigilant said, "and witnesses cannot forget." The chamber fell silent again, but not empty, for in the walls, in the circuits, in the blood, Sevek remained, watching, waiting, not for vengeance, not for redemption, but for the galaxy to remember. Back aboard the Vigil's ship, Rael sat alone. His eyes were open, but what he saw was no longer the void. It was memory, and memory had teeth. The stars outside seemed dimmer, not from light lost, but from truth gained, and somewhere deep in his bones a whisper echoed. "We did not fall, we were pushed. Some legions remember with songs, others with oaths. The Night Lords remember with silence. There are no war hymns among them, no martial cries to carry into battle, only the hush before a scream, only the stillness before a corpse twitches, only the dreamless. They were never meant to lead, only to be feared. And now, beneath a rust-choked sky, on a world forgotten even by cartographers, the Night Lord's last true host gathered. They came not in force but in shadows. Old cruisers with no heraldry, broken strike craft with hulls etched in nostrum and glyphs, each a curse, each a wound. From the edges of shattered subsectors they emerged, drawn by whispers on encrypted frequencies none outside their kind could interpret. Whispers sent by Vigilant, not a summons, a confession. Rael stood beside him, changed. He no longer spoke quickly. He no longer dreamed, not since Sevek, not since Cerinthus. One by one, the ships blinked into the void around the grave world of Ossovar Tertius, where the siege would begin. Each bore relics of wars long lost, cages of flayed bones, the bloodied aquila of fallen chaplains, servo-skulls still transmitting imperial sermons, interrupted mid-verse. Rael watched them arrive, and felt not pride nor terror, only inevitability. Some were monsters. One warband strode forth with no flesh left, only bone and plated iron. Another knelt before a mummified head wired into their Vox network, obeying its croaking orders as if still alive. These were not men, not warriors, but echoes of a legion that had outlived its purpose, and still they came, not to serve, not to rebuild, but to witness. Vigilant addressed them from a raised dais of cracked adamantium, scavenged from a wrecked thunderhawk. He did not roar. He did not command. He spoke. We were never meant to survive this long. Our father dreamed a truth too terrible for the galaxy, so they killed him for it. Not with blade or bolt, but with silence. They let him break, alone, and so we broke with him. The crowd remained motionless, not reverent, numb. Many had forgotten the sound of another Astartes voice. Some had forgotten their own. But something has changed, Vigilant said. The Imperium's shell has cracked. Guilliman walks again. The High Lords squabble like carrion birds. And the cracks are letting in light. He gestured behind him, where Rael stepped forward and held out a memory shard. Project Epitaph, the final echo of Sevek, the pain of a legion encoded in data and suffering, the last voice of the one who remembered why they were feared. This is not a weapon, Vigilant said. It is a mirror, one we will hold to the face of the Imperium. Let them see what they've done. Let them feel what they've buried. Still, no cheers, but some heads bowed, others whispered. Rael saw tears, real ones, falling down iron cheek plates, not for lost brothers, not for lost glory, but for something far older, a name. Night Lords, not traitors, not warlords, just sons, unwanted, unhealed, unforgiven. Later, beneath the old subspire of Ossovar's orbital hulk, Rael knelt before the burial chamber of a nameless Night Lord, one of the original Terran-born. The armor was cracked. The helm still bore marks of flame. No name remained, only the scrawled words on the tomb's shattered slab. I feared I would become what they called me, and in time, I did. Rael traced it with his gauntlet, and spoke quietly, only to the dark. I am still afraid. Behind him, Vigilant answered, so am I. There was no comfort, no absolution, only purpose, and that, for the Night Lords, was enough. That night, if night could be called such on a world without sun or moon, Rael dreamed, but not of terror, not of guilt. He dreamed of Nostromo, whole. Before the mines, before the curfews, he dreamed of sky. And he wept, not for what they lost, but for the simple, inescapable fact that none of it had ever been real. There is a silence in death, but not absence. Just after the siege fell quiet, and just before the stars resumed their endless indifference, a sound lingered, not a scream, not a war cry, but a single crackling breath, recorded by a shattered vox link still humming in a crater. The breath belonged to Rael. He lay beneath the corpse of a downed Night Lord dreadnought, crushed by its own history, one arm gone, helm sheared open, the stench of ash in every vent of his lungs. The siege had ended, not with retreat, not with surrender, but with completion. They had breached the cathedral of Osovar Prime, where the Imperium once processed inquisitorial condemnations for the entire systems. The Night Lords made no declaration, no warning, only a message left in blood upon the walls. Judgment is not yours to give. It was always ours. Inside, the Vigilant had planted the memory shard, the final echo of Sevek, Project Epitaph, a transmission of a dream long dead, a confession of what the Night Lords had become and what they had always been. Not monsters, not sons of curs, just men taught to fear before they could speak. The echo spread like infection, a psychic pulse wrapped in encrypted sorrow. Across the segmentum obscurus, administratum adepts fell catatonic. Scholars burned their own tongues in silence. The black ships recorded bursts of Nostroman whispers even the Sisters of Silence could not fully contain. And Gilliman, far from this forgotten world, stirred in unease. But that was after. Before that came the end. Rael remembered little of the final assault, only fragments. A chaplain with a voice like thunder turned to fire mid-curse. A servo turret reprogrammed with a child's lullaby. A fallen Astartes clutching a toy. A wooden bat carved in Nostroman style. And vigilant, always vigilant. His final words not screamed, but breathed as he stepped into the light of the cathedral's sanctum and let himself burn. We are not seeking redemption, only remembrance. And Rael did not die, not yet. Glad he crawled, through smoke, through time, through memory, until he reached the highest spire, once a place for loyalist sermons. Now stripped, cracked open by orbital fire, its uppermost walls gone. The stars bled through. He could see them. And as he lay there, armor fusing to bone, skin flaking from radiation, he heard something. Footsteps, not heavy, not imperial, not demonic, just familiar. A shadow stood at the broken edge of the spire. Rael, blind in one eye, blinked and saw the silhouette of Kurz. But it was not him, not the Night Haunter. This one did not speak in prophecy or madness. This one said only, "You were never wrong to be afraid. But you were wrong to believe fear was all you were." And then Rael laughed, a soft, broken sound, like wind over cracked stone. The last true Night Lord, forgotten by both Imperium and Warp, laughed beneath the stars of a galaxy that never wanted him. And he said, to no one, to everyone, "Let them fear us one final time, and then let them remember." There was no grave, no monument, but across the void, ships that bore no flags went dark all at once, and those that searched for them found only static, and on Ossovar Tertius, nothing, no bodies, no ruins, only silence, and in some places strange glyphs burned into the walls, a bat in flight, and beneath it a name, not of a man, not of a warband, but of a memory, Nostromo. And in the centuries that followed, among the tortured archives of the Inquisition, among data caches locked beneath flame protocols, there was found only one surviving record of the siege, a single voice recovered from the ash interference of Ossovar's dying Vox networks. It spoke only once, the voice of Rael. The Night Lords were never lost, only forgotten, and in forgetting us, you doomed yourselves to remember